talking about some of the current problems today. You know, following the March 2011 tsunami and the earthquake in Japan, supply chains worldwide really felt the after effects of that natural disaster. And the lessons to be learned are still being analyzed by supply chain experts as a means of really preempting further and future ramifications from such a catastrophe. Now, risk comes in many forms, and the key to insulating your supply chain against costly delays or failures can be found through software solutions and process changes. And instituting a robust collaborative software platform and consolidating data from your external systems can buffer your supply chain operations from all of these types of major risk factors. Now, during the next 20 to 30-minute webcast, we're going to talk about the increased risk in retail, the types of risk, and how to identify and steer from it, and reap the benefits of a collaborative supplier network that'll create supply chain excellence. Now, traditionally, retail supply chains were simple, and they carried less risk. Retailers in the old days, let's say, would place orders with national brands and rely on those national brands to ensure that the right product arrives at the right place at the right time. But even if you're still relying on national brands to fill your shelves, ultimately you need to guarantee the stream of goods flows without interruption. Now today, private label brands comprise more of the share of products in your store. So the responsibility rests on the shoulders of your internal sourcing teams. With all the multiple sales channels, international sales, online, outlet, specialty, all the others that exist in the global retail environment just complicate the situation. The mix of private label, store brands, and national brands inherently brings with it greater potential for risk as your trading partner ecosystem expands to fill all this demand. And everything you do is influenced by global sourcing issues and obstacles, and this just compounds the level of risk at each turn you make. Now, when it comes to managing risk, which comes in a lot of different forms that we'll go over and talk about, there's challenges. You can find risk almost everywhere you look in the supply chain. So it's important to contain the amount of risk you're exposed to before it becomes overwhelming. When we talk about risk, what we really mean is disruption. And these can be caused by anything from political unrest, extreme weather, or simply a lack of communication between your teams, which could stem from simply speaking a different language per se based on the respective roles within the ecosystem. Industry experts agree that you can't plan for eventuality, so you have to strive to identify and address the weaknesses. And this is the first step. You take a long, hard look at your supply chain to determine what vulnerabilities might be lurking. And I can give you some examples, but risk can be as unique as the supply chain that it affects. There's no such thing as one size fits all when it comes to this topic. Supply chain risk comes from a range of sources that each warrant scrutiny by sourcing professionals whose primary role is to maintain the flow of goods. So I'm going to go in and talk about the major types of risk and give you some examples. The first, environmental risk. Now, these are risks that occur in the natural world, including acts of God, human-related accidents like fire or other disruptions to production that lead to further breakdowns. Now, we've also recently seen how the social political instability places strain on the people, economies, and governments where sourcing is most prevalent. So any risks that are, inherent to our environment that we live and work in affect environment. Organizational risks. Now, they're classified as either external or internal risks. So first, let's look at the external risks within organizational risk. External risks result from outside pressure on the organization, such as political, economic, technological, sociological, or cultural changes. Now, these changes create a negative influence on the goals of the company. Now, keep in mind that external risks to your organization also include the trading partners that are in your network and the effects on them. So then the other side is the internal risk. And internal risk can result either from processes or mainly from management or, let's say, mismanagement of information. In a published study last year, nearly 70% of executives lack the information they need to manage effectively because employees withhold vital input out of fear that doing otherwise might reflect poorly on them. And this is an example of information management related internal organization risk. The next type of risk is network-relational. Now, some of us have been around long enough that we know about the technology boom of the 90s when the world became flat. And that's the term that was referred to when we described the globalization of commerce and the subsequent shift required for countries and companies and individuals to remain competitive in the global market where historical and geographical divisions really became increasingly non-existent. Now, the shift brought with it the need for technology and people to build bigger networks to function more effectively. In turn, the amplified number of connections leads to risk of breakdown in communication or linkage. So as we flattened the world and we broke down the barriers that existed before, we built networks through technology that now add more intricacy to the system. Likewise, technology itself brings risk. So the physical failures to hardware and software that facilitate communication and also the increased potential for IP theft that really leads to loss of exclusivity. So these are all types of network relational risk. When applying these types of risks to the retail supply chain, we can easily see where the fractures can crop up and cause a major break, something we need to avoid. Given the number of countries retailers and brands typically source from, and the expansive distance between the production point and the point of sale, threat of risk in this ecosystem is high. The nature of doing business globally, coupled with the multi-tiered network of people and technology, complicates the situation and creates a unique scenario that's difficult to manage. So how do you steer clear of risk? Well, despite all of these increasing risk factors that I just pointed out to you, a lot of retailers are still just closing their eyes, covering their heads, and hoping nothing goes wrong. But supply chain executives need to hedge their risks and make changes to the way they've done business in the past. Now, deciding on the best approach to mitigate risk has long been analyzed by supply chain management professionals. As a matter of fact, I found a 2003 study, and it still stands good today. The validity of this study is that they state that we need to attack each source with a well-defined strategy. And there's 4 methods to combat supply chain risk. So let's look at those 4 methods. The first is avoidance. This is usually a reactive strategy as an alternative to facing the risk head-on, hence the use of the term avoidance. In the retail ecosystem, this method really can be illustrated through the dropping of styles, or not sourcing from certain geographic regions, or shying away from suppliers that carry greater risk. Now, through avoidance, organizations are forced to withdraw from producing specific items or producing product in certain regions of the world or using particular suppliers to minimize the potential from the negative impact. So avoidance is first.